All that means for you is that you need to now get planning permission if you intend on renting your property out for more than 90 days. It becomes a sui generis use class and you need to apply for planning permission. Now, each local authority is different. So London, this is a big issue. And I would say that in London, if you were to apply, it would be challenging to get planning permission for it because housing demand is so high. But across the country, this is different. So you may well find in your local authority that you can apply for this and it will be okay. And if you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. I wanted to put together a video on Airbnb and the pitfalls that people have with it. It's a common kind of misconception that changing your property to an Airbnb can be done without any issues, particularly planning and particularly in London at the moment. So I wanted to put together a video to kind of guide people through that so they don't get burnt. So I'm going to kind of walk you through why it's become so popular, why local planning authorities are now targeting it as a big issue, and what you can do to kind of get around this big issue. So Airbnb has become a very big issue, particularly in big cities, Paris, London, other cities within the UK as well. It's a way of people getting very good returns on their property to a normal AST, whether they have a new job somewhere else or they're just moving out or they go on holiday and they rent their property out. It's a very good source of income for people that could be using their property for better purposes, for creating better income for themselves. So the issue has come about whereby Airbnb has become so popular. Tourists from all around the world are traveling all around the world and they're looking for really good accommodation. The standard hotel offer now doesn't really meet people's needs. Airbnb is very much taken over on that respect. You get a unique property, you get within a local community, and you kind of, you're made to feel at home because of the very nature of the property and the rooms that you get. So as these became more and more popular, people were realizing that the returns that they could make on these properties were incredibly high. So what people ended up doing is moving out of that property and actually making that property a full-time Airbnb. They were getting great returns and there was absolutely no need to ever change that. Now, COVID happened, changed that. People weren't traveling, so the incentive was actually to turn that back into a normal AST so that they could have long-term income throughout that time. But leading up to that period of COVID, the Airbnb situation became a particularly hot issue in big cities, like I mentioned, Paris, but also London and other big cities. And local councils, particularly the enforcement departments, were looking at ways to find out whether or not people were using the Airbnb process or not. So the reason they were looking into it, and the big issue was because Airbnb is taking away from the council's housing stock. Every council has a tremendous pressure to provide a certain amount of housing throughout what's called the plan period for 5 years. They need to show projections that they are meeting certain housing targets in order to meet the demand of the local population rising. So what Airbnb was doing was taking away that housing supply from what was normally a normal residential unit. Now, normally, if you were to apply for planning permission to change use from a residential unit, say a flat or a house, to a hotel, say, which is what Airbnb kind of is, it would never be granted planning permission because you're taking away from the housing stock. Housing is the priority use across the whole country, across probably every country. So taking away from that stock is a big issue. So Airbnb became kind of a way around that, and that's why local authorities were targeting it as a big issue, because it was happening under their noses. They were getting people changing the use of properties without applying for planning permission, and they were losing housing stock as a result, or are losing housing stock as a result currently. So as a fallout of all of that, councils found it very, very hard to find out whether or not properties were being listed. They could look on Airbnb for listings, but companies like Airbnb weren't readily going to give up people's data to find out how long people were renting units for. So it became a very hard thing for councils to find out how long units were rented for. They could research it only so far. I mean, it was only a team of people looking at it, but a property would change. Maybe they would list it on a different service, and it just became too big of a task for them to target on their own. So now, as a consequence of that, in London, there is now a law that says you cannot let your property out for a short-term let for more than 90 days in a calendar year. Anything less than that, it's fine. And also, if you're just renting out a room, that's also fine. This is targeting specifically people that are renting out entire properties. So now, if you're renting out your property for more than 90 days, you need to get planning permission. And if you are renting out for more than 90 days and you don't have planning permission, then it's quite risky, basically, in terms of planning. I have a kind of responsibility to say that, but people are finding that local councils are not getting in touch with them about it at the moment. They think it's fine. But just know that in the background, this is a big issue in planning, and they are looking at ways to find out which properties are being let and for how long. So it's only a matter of time before they figure it out. So as a consequence of that, Airbnb now, particularly in London, they don't let you rent your property out for more than 90 days. So they kind of block it at the front end. Now, unfortunately with that is that you cannot, there are other services. So there's other services that you can rent your property out for. So it becomes very hard to manage. But that Airbnb being the biggest kind of channel of all of that, that's what they are implementing now. So kind of to break it down factually, C3 is a single dwelling house. That's a flat or a house. Now, when you rent a house out for more than 90 days, it becomes what's called sui generis, which basically means it has its own use class, and there are other types of uses that fall within that are hard to define. So it's called a sui generis use class, and it's not really important in terms of its name. All that means for you is that you need to now get planning permission if you intend on renting your property out for more than 90 days. It becomes a sui generis use class, and you need to apply for planning permission. Now, each local authority is different. So London, this is a big issue. And I would say that in London, if you were to apply, it would be challenging to get planning permission for it because housing demand is so high. But across the country, this is different. So you may well find in your local authority that you can apply for this and it will be okay. Also, you might find that the enforcement department are less active in trying to find out whether or not a property is listed for Airbnb or not, or listed for more than 90 days. So it's particularly an issue in big cities, but it's becoming more of a countrywide issue. So when you apply for planning permission, there's going to be a few things that you need to demonstrate as part of the permission. So effectively, it's going to be different across each authority, but in essence, the main thing is that residential areas currently have a residential character. They have people that live in them, and there's a kind of character to that area of a residential community. If you are changing that to basically a hotel, which is what Airbnb is, then that changes the character dramatically. So local authorities are very concerned about that, because if they let one pass, then if they change the whole residential character of a whole area, then not only does it affect the housing stock, but it affects the local area in terms of mix of communities. It makes the housing area much less accessible because it's so expensive, because Airbnb is so much more costly than a normal AST is. So the kind of fundamental nature of the local community in that area gets impacted. So it may just seem like an inconsequential thing that you're changing your property to Airbnb for a bit of extra income, but just know that a local authority, looking at it from the macro level, what are the communities like in the local area? What are the economic circumstances of the local area? What access to housing do people need? What's the type of housing they need? Do we need family units? Do we need small units? Do we actually need hotels? Because there are kind of tourist policies in local authorities whereby they will allow certain amount of hotels or B&Bs in order to serve that kind of tourist community. But if you're growing that and it's actually replacing the local housing stock, then that becomes a bigger issue. So I can't go into each local authority, obviously that would take too long, but those are the big issues you need to look at. So a local authority will have policies on this if it's a big issue. So you will find that, look at their hotel policies or look at their B&B policies, or look to find if they have a policy particularly on short-term lets, converting a house into short-term lets, because they may have tests of density of how many units they have in a certain area that would make it acceptable. So you need to have a look at those things. So that's kind of it. I mean, this kind of video was put together as a kind of warning. It's a very active issue right now, but there's a fundamental misconception that people can change their house to an Airbnb without there being any issues from a planning point of view. Just know that there is. It's not particularly active in terms of, it's hard to be detected by a local authority right now. But just know that this issue at national level and local level is becoming more and more of an issue. So the big issue is that you're changing a house from a house to an Airbnb. The council care about a housing stock. There's big demands on housing. People need housing. But Airbnb and that nature of B&Bs are taking away that housing stock because it's becoming so popular to landlords. So there's a point there of conflict where councils are trying to keep their residential communities together, but it's very hard to track. So there is legislation that will be coming out about that, but just know those are the rules. In London, it's a big issue. 90 days is the rule right now, and it's probably going to be spread out across other areas across the country. So just be aware of that.